Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to yet another edition of Truth to Power. My name is Faraz Patel. We have another packed show for you. First up, we're going to be talking to the One Movement South Africa founder and leader, Mmusi Maimane, to discuss what is happening with COVID-19 and, of course, a historic constitutional court judgment that occurred yesterday. And then, of course, in the second part of the half an hour, we're going to be talking to the partner of the late Colin Scorza. It was a recorded interview, so, of course, we're going to be hearing more from Mama Nomsa Mancho with regards to how the family is doing. And, of course, there is a possibility of a hike in taxi fees. We're going to be talking to the National Taxi Alliance spokesperson with regards to that. Well, let's get over to our first interview. And, of course, he is somebody who needs no introduction at all. It is, of course, none other than Mr. Mmusi Maimane, the One Movement South Africa founder and leader. Mr. Maimane, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your audience. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to be on.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Mr. Maimane, before we go on to talking about the movement, I just want to get your take on yesterday's historical judgment by the Constitutional Court.
I think yesterday is a moment in our history that generations will remember that really reinstilled a sense of democracy in our country. We have a history in South Africa of state capture, which really begins out of the fact that parties become captured by individuals who are not directly elected by the public. And then naturally, the effect of that is not only patronage, but it's also corruption that emerges. The Constitutional Court judgment yesterday really gives effect to the age-old mantra of democracy by the people and for the people. And so now for the first time, an individual does not have to be associated with a political party. They can stand as an individual and have the community or their constituency vote for them and accountability be felt by the community. And therefore, I think yesterday is a historic and a significant judgment that will propel the future of South Africa. I could not be more excited, would be an understatement. I think more than anything, you feel a deep sense of humility about the future of our nation and what it will mean.
Mmusi, and this of course comes to the next question. What went behind the formation of One South African Movement?
Well, if the question is about One South Africa Movement, I mean, One South Africa Movement is a grassroots-based movement. We want to build a South Africa upon which all citizens, regardless of race, background, religion, can stand together and work together towards a prosperous South Africa upon which all men and women can live together in peace and prosper together. We believe that all South Africans must be doing three things: a high level of activism, a high level of advocacy where they fight on behalf of those who are left out, and a high degree of holding the government to account. We are focused on the future of our nation, and we want to build an inclusive economy. And this is a movement that says, let's all work together, because truth, inherent in the name One South Africa, means that we've got many South Africas. We've got a South Africa that is wealthy and a South Africa that is poor. You've got a South Africa where we have the highest level of inequality in the world. And we've got a South Africa upon which some people get the best education, some people get the worst education. Others would even go as far as saying we have a South Africa which is white and a South Africa that is black. That is what we are trying to break. We're saying we can build one South Africa for all. That is the objective we're trying to work towards.
Mmusi, I know that your movement has been endorsed by many across the globe, and there is a sense of Pan-Africanism to your movement. When I spoke to someone that was with you during the DA, Mr. Herman Mashaba, he said he had 5 pillars that which he based his party on. Are there some sort of pillars that the One South African movement has with regards to what you could build on for the future?
Well, as again, what Mr. Herman Mashaba is seeking to build is in and of itself a political party. Now, when I left formal politics in the form of party politics, I rejected the idea. I said politics is dead. And I said, if we're going to bring change in this country, we need a different vehicle. And I believe inherently that the moment you go back to the old party model, you achieve the same outcomes. All you are effectively doing is changing colors on the ballot box and changing colors in parliament, but nothing really in many ways changes. We want to bring real change, and this begins with a democratic change. And therefore, my relationship with Mr. Mashaba and any other South African for that matter is to say, let's be part of a movement. Let's work together, because when we can do that, we can bring the change that is required. But the moment you create an impression that we must go back to parties, you end up with the system as it is. The only fight in South Africa isn't against just corruption. Can't say one party is better than another because it's less corrupt. Even if we didn't steal all the money in this country, or no one stole any money, the inequality in our country would remain, and many people would still to this day be unemployed. We need a new vision, a different economic model, and high levels of accountability among citizens.
Musi, before I go into the question with regards to the lockdown, when I spoke to Mr. Herman Mashaba, he said he felt a sense of liberation within himself the moment he left the Democratic Alliance. I know, of course, you and him left around the same time. Do you share that same feeling of Mr. Mashaba?
The same feeling as Mr. Mashaba as it pertains to the Democratic Alliance?
Yes. So where he said he felt a sense of liberation when he left the party.
Look, I think I just couldn't catch the words you were describing in terms of his sentiment towards the DA. One, I hold the simple view, parties and politics, they brought us to this point. And when I look at the broad issues in the Western Cape, you can't deny that even after years of DA government, there's still many South Africans who are left behind, who are excluded. Therefore, we must challenge that paradigm and ask the very fundamental question, why is it that certain communities are still left out, and what can we do to bring about the change? And the second point is, I will certainly never be in an institution or a process that seeks to mobilize on behalf of one race or whatever the case might be. The clash between myself and the DA really pertained to the fact that, look, I always said our vision was to build one South Africa for all. And if there were South Africans who couldn't agree with that vision within the party, it became quite clear that we had a clash, and they rejected my vision. But it's not something that I, certainly sitting here today, want to lament. It is something that says if there are two different visions, you want to build a vision for a particular race, and I want to build a vision for a South Africa for all, that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to work with all South Africans. And so I want to focus on more the future of the conversation and say, can we be able to reform South Africa for where we're going, rather than focusing on just one race? Because it could be just as wrong, or certainly it's not something I support, for maybe even a party like the Freedom Front Plus, who will say, we'll stand for just this race, or the EFF will stand for just that race, or the ANC will stand for just that race. It is not, I believe, in my view, consistent with the vision that President Nelson Mandela had for our country. That's why we need to bring change.
Musi, let's talk about the lockdown. In your view and the view of the movement, how do you believe government has dealt with regards to its citizens during this lockdown?
Well, I think, I can only compare Corona and the pandemic that's occurred as a bit like when your house catches fire. When your house catches fire, it is not uncommon that any rational thinking human being will get a fire hydrant and try to take out the fire. But then once the fire has been going on for a while, now you have some big decisions that you make, which is about which room do you want to save, how do you want to rebuild, where do you want to stop the fire first? And what I felt about this government is that it was easier to introduce lockdown measures. The hard lockdown, which was level 5, it had to give government time to prepare itself, and that was like pulling the fire hydrant. Now the difficult decisions are coming, and it's clear that the government doesn't really have a plan as to how it wants to manage it. It first of all has deployed more troops than we've ever had in the democratic history of South Africa, which means that in many ways that the only way they can enforce lockdowns is to police and militarize people, which is not ideal because you can't keep citizens locked up for that length of period. They've had debates about which sections must open. I still today can't understand why during lockdown you could buy a short sleeve vest, but you can't buy a long sleeve vest because it's winter. I mean, these are mad regulations at best. But what's even become more worrying is that as they claim that they've been following world advice and health advice, Suddenly you've got a government that is heading towards its own peak in terms of the rate of infection going towards August and September, that the same government says, well, let's open up schools just so that we can add to the many numbers of people who are now going to be walking around. This implication means that you'll have 10 million citizens back on the road at the same time. And what I've seen in the last recent days is the fact that now even we're starting to lose how many, we're getting more infections, we're getting more learners getting infected. And this is indeed a situation that demonstrates to me that this is a government that isn't quite clear about what the future of South Africa is. It is very clear about what the history of South Africa is, but it is certainly not clear about its future.
Musi, you hold on. We're going to be coming to you back after this commercial break to continue the discussion with the leader and the founder of One Movement South Africa. Welcome back to Truth to Power. I'm in discussion with the One Movement founder and leader, Musi Maimane. Musi, thank you so much for staying on Skype with us. I just wanted to get your view with regards to the SANDF inquiry, or the inquiry into the SANDF and the South African Police Service, of course, into the tragic death of Mr. Colin Scorza. Of course, the other names like Sibosiso Amos, Petrus Miguels, Adana Emmanuel. Do you believe that our law enforcement authorities have really, protected its citizens during these difficult times?
Well, I think this is where the tragedy of lockdown regulations have become. Now we've got citizens who have been, whose rights have been taken away from them, lives have been taken, mainly because they're poor. The new discriminator in this country is the fact that poor people's rights are being trampled on. You will never hear in South Africa that a wealthy person was ill-treated the way the police do to poor people, who many of them happen to be black people. Therefore, the rights here must be fought for and be protected, because if we're not careful, we're going to end up with a violation of too many rights. And that's why the court action is important. And I support the view of the Collins Khoza case. And I support the court action, certainly against the education ministry, because there again, wealthy people are going to end up going back to school. Their schools will always be ready. But what happens to poor people's schools? What happens to those schools? And whose child? Why should a poor person have to choose between getting educated or going to school? This is an injustice. That's why we need the change that we are referring to, where these lockdown regulations must be readjusted, and we must make sure that they are equitable to all citizens.
Musi, we have to talk about gender-based violence. This week we saw the brutal, tragic death of Tshegofatso Pule. We've seen this, of course, last year with Uyanene Mketane. We've seen it with so many women who have lost their lives because of gender-based violence. Is this another case where the state is failing to help these women who have a better chance of being raped or murdered than getting employment?
The fight against gender-based violence is a systemic matter that requires every citizen, including the state. Because before we get to gender-based violence, we have to ask ourselves the question, what happens to a child who's born in this country? If many children in our country are born in environments where alcohol and fetal alcohol syndrome, not only by the time they get to school are they malnourished, unable to get through that school, they are frustrated. Families in this country are broken down. The plight of South Africans, particularly black South Africans, many of them grow up without stable families, stable homes, means that you've got a breakdown in relations there. Once they get to a new family unit, you add the stress of poverty, you add the stress of unemployment, you then naturally add the stress of poor policing. You end up with so many of these incidents of gender-based violence. So how we treat a young girl at school, where a young girl drops out of school, is an indicator of how, as a society, we are going to treat that same girl once she finishes school. So the net effect of it is that when young girls end up in homes and environments, they are getting taken advantage of because we fail to look after them from birth. and fail to look after them in primary school, why would the state look after them when they're after that? Lastly, when a case of gender-based violence occurs, the regulations about making sure people get arrested are lost and are not effected, and the net consequence of it is that many people get away, literally, sadly, with murder. But it's going to require men to speak up first. That's why I always challenge people. I say, the reason I do boxing is because if any man thinks that their partner is a punching bag, they must come to me so that I'll find them in the ring, we'll have a go. But let's arrest people who perpetuate gender-based violence, lock them up.
Musi, before I let you go, I know that you have other engagements that are happening during the day. Your message to all South Africans with regards to the One Movement South Africa.
We are together. If we're going to change our country, we need to build one South Africa. And by one South Africa, it means we are not looking at the history. In many ways, our history is with us. We're not saying it's for black people, white people, Indian people, colored people. I'm saying let's all work together to be people who bring about change in our communities, in our cities, in our provinces. And we could really be activists for change. Let's not talk. That's what politicians do. Let's act. That's why even in feeding, even in making sure no one goes to bed hungry, we're setting up new education hubs. They can be a part of it. And I'm calling upon all South Africans. You can be the change you are seeking. Let us work together to build a South Africa for all, because it's the only place we've got to call home, and we can build a South Africa upon which all citizens can prosper together.
Musi Maimane, the founder and leader of One Movement South Africa, thank you so much for making the time for us, and all the best with your new movement.
Much appreciated.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. There we go. Musi Maimane, the leader, founder of One Movement South Africa, setting out his aims with regards to what he wants to do. Of course, with the provincial and national elections that will be coming up in the future, with the Constitutional Court ruling that happened yesterday, that means no one needs to be affiliated with a political party to run for office. Well, coming up after the break, we promise you an exclusive interview with Mama Nomsa Manshaw. She's, of course, the partner of the late Colin Scoza. Stay tuned to Truth to Power. Welcome back to Truth to Power on ITV Networks. Now, on Good Friday, a tragedy happened in Alexandra. A gentleman by the name of Colin Scoza was brutally attacked and murdered by members of the South African Defence Force and the South African Police Service. And it was revealed this week that 5 Metro Police officers were also present during this. Of course, this has left another family who are in the poverty line in South Africa without a breadwinner. He was not the only one. The names of course, Sibusiso Amos, Petros Miguels, Adana Emmanuel, and so many others that have yet to be revealed have also died at the hands of authorities that were meant to protect us during this lockdown. Now, of course, due to commitments that Mama Nomsa Manshaw has had today, we had a pre-recorded discussion with her just to get an idea of how the family is doing and, of course, how they will be coping in the future and the justice they are seeking with regards to the late Colin Scoza. Take a listen. Now joining me on the line is the widow of the late Colin Scoza, Ms. Nomsa Manshaw. Ma Nomsa, good afternoon and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, from us here at ITV and from myself, we'd like to pass our condolences on the passing away of Colin Scoza. I know it's been 2 months since the tragic death. I just wanted to find out, how is the family keeping, and most importantly, how are you keeping at this time?
Good afternoon. It's still hard for the family to accept what happened on Good Friday. It was on the 10th of April. So it's still very hard for us to accept what happened. Everyone knows how Colin died, so no one will accept Colin's death. So it's still hard and painful for us.
Nomsa, I know that this has been something that has been in the courts for quite some time. Just on Wednesday, new evidence came out that it was just not the army that was involved or the South African Police Service, but 5 Metro Police officers. When looking at this, surely this is something that is so tragic that it's really affected the family quite hard. But also the fact that how could the authorities, people that were meant to protect citizens of South Africa, are now going ahead and assaulting people on the streets?
It's a very simple thing that happened. Remember, everyone in this world we believe that South African NDF are the powerful people and respected people that we look up to. So these are the ones that are assaulting people out there. So it's a very shameful thing and it's a very painful thing. So we are very disappointed on them.
Yeah, just last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, he had wished his condolences. I don't know whether, members of the government had visited the home. I know that the SANDF, I think it was in this week, said that some of their officials had visited the home. Does that in any way, Nomsa, ease the pain that has been endured on your family during this time?
No one from government visited us, not even President Cyril Ramaphosa. Colleagues died on 10th of April, and President has been quiet since that time. He only apologized 2 days. So it seems like they don't care about Colin's death. Since he died on 10th of April, it was very quiet. President never mentioned a thing about Colin. So we don't know what to say about government. Not even one of them came to see what Kota family is going through. What are we doing right now? What is the position are we right now? They never came.
Yeah, and I think that is very sad because you would expect the head of the state, which is, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, to make the trip to Alexandra and to at least be with the family, even if it is for a little bit of time. And I think, that is really, really disappointing. But a group that has been very supportive of you has, of course, been the Economic Freedom Fighters. Nomsa, can you explain to us how the EFF, with their CIC, Julius Malema, has been assisting the family with regards to the legal fees and, of course, any other support that they have been giving you?
EFF started supporting us the next day after Collins died. They were very helpful and supportive. EFF paid everything that Collins wanted. We buried Collins with dignity because of EFF. EFF paid all the expenses of Collins Kosa's funeral. They also moved Kosa from Joburg so that he can be buried home in Limpopo. So EFF paid all of that.
Yeah, you've just heard, obviously, the CIC, Julius Malema, on Monday during the hashtag Black Lives Matter protest, saying that the EFF had been heavily involved with regards to helping the family of the late Collins Kosa. But, of course, in his address, he said that they are still pursuing justice because he believes that the finality of this has not been resolved as yet. How confident are you, Nomsa, and the rest of the family that justice will be served? Of course, it will not bring back Collins, but what it will do is set the precedence that there is a justice system that can work in South Africa. How confident are you that justice will be served for your late partner?
I believe, and as a Kosa family, we believe that Collins will find justice. The lawyers that we have now, we have been helped by EFF, and we believe that they will fight this fight until end. And they are still talking to us about the case. So where the case is now, we still hope that Collins Kosa will fight until the end, and we will get justice.
And I think all of South Africa is looking for justice because this is something that can't go unnoticed. There has to be some sort of justice and punishment to whoever was involved for what had happened on that tragic Good Friday. Nomsa, of course, you've been seeing in the United States of America the murder of George Floyd that happened. And this is, of course, something that happened way after the murder of your husband. When looking at that, when looking at the support that has been there for George Floyd and, of course, for the late Colin Scoza and for so many others, Siposiso Amos, Pedros Miguels, who also died at the hands of the authorities that were meant to protect South African citizens. How does it make you feel, Nomsa, that people are coming out in support of your husband and other people like George Floyd and other South Africans who have died at the hands of the authorities?
It seems like people are angry out there. It seems like people are saying enough is enough. So if we don't stand up and fight this, it will continue. But from the support that I see outside, from the support that society is giving us, it's enough. I think we will fight this together. We can win. The support that society is giving out there, it's really pushing us as a Xhosa family, and I think for other families that they lost their loved ones. So together we will fight this.
You know, a lot of times people say that we should trust the police, we should trust the law enforcement officials. But, you know, Nomsa, I want to try and put myself in your shoes, and it is very, very difficult because no one has experienced something that you have experienced at this moment during the lockdown, except for the families who have lost their loved ones during this time. When looking at this, Nomsa, are you able to trust law enforcement officials after the tragic death of your husband?
How can you trust people who are assaulting you? How can you trust people who must protect you, but they are not protecting you, they are assaulting you? So, for myself, I don't trust them.
Now I can hear the pain in your voice, Ma, and we are feeling it right here in the studio also, because this is something that has really struck South Africa and hit South Africa very, very badly. And in this week, of course, we saw the murder of Tsegofatso Pule, which is another, example of how, gender-based violence is really, really affecting this country. And when looking at that and comparing that to the murder of Colin Scoza, this is something that has really affected and is affecting especially, the disenfranchised black people who are still there right now in this country, even after 26 years of democracy. Nomsa, before I let you go, what are your favorite memories of the late Colin Scoza? What is something that even after his death, you can say, I shared many great memories with this man?
The day Colin Scoza died, on a Good Friday, he was very happy. The time the soldiers took his life, they found him eating lunch with me and my sister-in-law. Collins was someone that loved to share, so I will never forget Collins. Collins was someone that will always make families together. He likes to go out with friends. So for myself, no one will ever make me happy like Collins did.
Nomsa, we'd like to thank you so much for making the time for us. We wish you strength, guidance, and lots of wisdom during this difficult time for you and the rest of your family. And I think most importantly, hopefully justice can come. I know it's not going to bring back the late Colin Scoza, but what it will do is say that enough is enough. Our law enforcement authority should protect us instead of hurting us. So hopefully, when justice is served, you can go on, you can carry on with your life, and of course, carry on the legacy that Colin Scoza had left your family. We thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. That was, of course, my interview with Mama Nomsa Mancho. Of course, she is the widow of the late Colin Scoza. And just listening to her voice, you could hear the pain. You could hear the tragedy, and of course, hopefully there will be justice that comes out from it. But the pertinent question does remain, are we able to trust our law enforcement authorities during this time? Now, on the line with me right now via Zoom, of course, this week, it was announced that taxi fares would increase. And of course, this would be something that would hit the consumers very, very hard, especially during a COVID-19 when our economy is going through a really, really difficult time. So joining me via Zoom is the National Taxi Alliance spokesperson, Mr. Theo Mullaly. Theo, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on Truth to Power.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, Theo. Theo, I just wanted to get your view on what had happened yesterday. I know that you told me there was consultations that was going on, and according to the MEC for Transport in Gauteng, Mr. Jacob Mamabolo, he said that there will be no increase in taxi fares from next week. So we just wanted to get the view from the National Taxi Alliance with regards to that and the consultations that you had with regards to various stakeholders.
Well, certainly. Well, once more, thanks for the opportunity. Perhaps let's start with the engagements with the minister yesterday. We had engagements. Obviously, the minister wanted to hear from us as to what is this that we are making of the proposal that he had given us in relation to the relief fund, for which we were not quite satisfied. He actually had us through and promised that he would revert to us by next Tuesday. Now, the other issue is that, you know, the previous 172% increase that was being spoken of was like, you know, chalk and cheese. Mm-hmm. It neither was here nor there because there were no broad consultations with all and sundry, which is why this whole thing fell flat on its face. And then now what then needs to happen is that the presentation that will be made by the minister next week, Tuesday, pending on that, because that will then inform the way forward. But however, I must hasten to say the industry, like any other industry, would from time to time adjust its tariffs. And therefore, you know, we still are consulting on this aspect. And once we are ready, we will make the necessary pronouncement as to what is this that we intend doing regarding the price increases. But the increases this time, although will be affected, but they will be, you know, more easy to be accepted by the communities. But let me also, you know, take this opportunity and request, you know, society at large that why is it that every time the taxi industry needs to make adjustments on its tariffs, there is an outcry out of society, and yet during the lockdown, you know, you had the retail sectors and other sectors that were actually in full operation, you know, putting up their markups. You know, prices were so exorbitant. But people were not crying, and they were actually paying for their needs. And we are running a business, and these vehicles need maintenance. And some of these vehicles, they're still being owed, so we need to service our debts on a monthly basis. And the drivers as well, we have not been making money. Look, let's then go back to the issue of the loading capacity. At first, we were told to only load 50% of our capacity. And during that time, we were basically working for moving people, and we were not making not even a cent. So then we then wrote a letter to the minister, you know, complaining about the experience. That's when the minister then decided that we should go back to 100% loading capacity with, you know, people putting on their masks, and there was a public outcry on that. And we then had to, you know, to chop and change, and, you know, we were told now to go to 70%. Now, in simple arithmetic terms, if you take a 15-seater and you load it with 7 people, you'll be breaking even. Basically, you won't be taking anything home. You'll just be covering your costs. And now once you load the 8th passenger, only then do you begin to show a profit. So basically, we've just been making a profit by loading that additional passenger. And that does not necessarily cover the actual costs of running this operation in terms of paying the rank fees to the associations. Rank fees are responsible for paying the queue marshals and the office administration staff, being able to can pay for the driver who actually generates this money, being able to can also have money to put food on the table for your family, and even maybe being able to can service the vehicle. So basically, we listened to government when government asked us to please be considerate. We did exactly that. We ensured that the issue of flattening the curve on COVID-19 has been adhered to. Vehicles were disinfected, no passenger boarded without being sanitized. And up until today, we still ensure at the rank level that these exercises do take effect so that we save society and ensure that we have passengers going forward. Now, these 30% that we have been losing throughout the 72 or 73 days to date has a negative impact. However, even though we were promised a holiday payment, especially with the financiers, not all financiers were coming forth. They had to be persuaded to ensure that everybody enjoys that like all other businesses. And now that the 3 months is about to lapse, from the 1st of July, the financiers will be expecting us to pay them their full amount. And where will we get that money from? So obviously there has to be one way of reviewing our tariffs by way of trying to augment for the losses that we've incurred. But this will have to be done, considering that the people that we ferry are people who do not have necessary money. But let me also hasten to mention that, the less than 30% that is made out of these other modes of transport that enjoys 100% of subsidy, it is very much unfair. And there is this, speculation around public that the taxi industry is not paying tax, but that is far from the truth. We pay variable taxes, but then even those that have been subsidized, they don't necessarily pay tax. What they are paying is part of the portion that the government has given them as a subsidy. Then they pay that back as tax back to government. And if you look at some of the routes that we compete with these other modes that have been subsidized, you'll realize that we're charging the same fares along the same corridors, and yet we are not being subsidized. So clearly, something must actually be done. But having said that, the cordial relationship that we have with the minister, it's quite okay, because at least now we are interacting, and there is also a pending taxi in Daba that will look at the corporatization of the taxi industry, ensure that we also are drawn into the subsidy bracket like everyone else. So yeah, indeed, the question of taxi fares is actually on the table, but it will be properly be informed by the responses from government. That will then give us a clear guidance as to what is this that we need to take into cognizance whilst working on the actual costs, benefit balances, so that we are able to show a profit at the end of the day.
Theo, just this morning on Twitter, I saw that Santaco, another organization, they say they're going ahead with a hike increase from the 1st of July. Now, I'm assuming that with the National Taxi Alliance, you guys are still going to be in consultation with a government. But looking at that, is that something that the Santaco probably won't be in the consultation, or do you foresee potentially government coming in and stopping that from happening? I know you can't comment on what Santaco is about to do, but they're going ahead and doing that. So are the NTA not going to follow Santaco's route, or is consultation going to be the key with regards to making sure that there is a leveled price that you as an organization can make money at the same time, but also the commuters will be able to afford the taxi fares on a daily basis?
Well, currently, Santaco is actually knocking at our doors, and we are listening to this that they are saying. This does not necessarily mean that the National Taxi Alliance has not been looking at that aspect. It is just that we have not been vocal about it. And the reason for that is because we believe that we need to consult broadly so that this that we go out in public and utter becomes the essence of the whole organizational output, as opposed to, just making a lot of noise without, consulting. This then, is a backwards and forward movement, which to us becomes a futile exercise. But yes, the government should come in handy, but we were told that there weren't sufficient funds. The fiscus has been overstretched. With that hindsight, we will also look at this that the government puts on the table, and only then will we be in a position to say as to what is this that we see as a possible increase. But it definitely would not be the 172%, which we believe was ridiculously high.
Theo, one final question before I let you go. Do you believe that the taxi industry will be able to recover after COVID-19 is gone, after the lockdown is finished? Because, of course, this is an industry that so much of the population of South Africa relies on to get to work and back and to do other activities. So how confident are you that the industry as a whole will be able to get back to the glory years it enjoyed, obviously, before COVID-19 and the lockdown had started?
Well, the only confidence will be drawn from what government will put on the table. Because currently, most of the taxi operators are being threatened by financiers to repossess their vehicles. So clearly, the taxi industry is never going to be the same, but we are very optimistic that it's going to be a transformed somewhat industry. And the rationale for that is this, that at least now there seems to be a political will, but then, that still has to be measured as to, what is this that, it is going to do for the taxi industry to become a better mode and a much more sustained, only Black-owned and controlled business that's still in existence in this country.
Mr. Theo Mullaly, the National Taxi Alliance spokesperson, thank you so much for making the time for us, sir.
Thank you very much for having us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, there we go. Of course, consultations will be done with regards to the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, with regards to what is going to happen with regards to the increase on a taxi fee. Well, Santaco this morning said they're going ahead on the 1st of July. The taxi increase fares will go up. But the question does remain, can South Africans who use this transport every single day to go to work and back, and of course to other activities, to put food onto their tables, how will it affect their pockets? This is something that of course needs to be looked at and really introspected with regards to how this can help South Africans, especially with us having a recession and the economy not looking good at this moment. Well, this has been another edition of Truth to Power with myself, Faraz Patel. Of course, you saw in the first half an hour, we spoke to the leader and founder of One Movement South Africa, Mr. Mmusi Maimane, with regards to the lockdown, the Constitutional Court ruling, and so many aspects to what is happening socially here in South Africa. We have then spoke to Mama Nomsa Mancho, who was of course the widow of the late Collins Akosa, and you just saw me speaking to Theo Mullaly, who was of course the spokesperson for the National Taxi Alliance. This has been another episode of Truth to Power. I will see you again, same time, same place next week. Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.